Hello, I'm Keith Lampe, also known as Ponderosa Pine, and I have some important information for young people on this auspicious occasion of the May 14th National Day of Action and Night of Mourning against offshore drilling, sponsored by the youth climate movement in the U.S., which calls itself It's Getting Hot in Here. Okay. I'm sure most of you are familiar with a great Beatles tune which begins, I read the news today, oh boy. Well, what I must relay to you now is much more than merely the English army had just won the war. I broke up watching this 7-minute YouTube video. YouTube.com/watch V=SJVO, capital Q, capital S, N, capital M, PC4. I know that's going to be hard to copy, but it's a tremendously important video. What got me watching it was learning that the dispersants in the Gulf are being used to hide the bodies of all of the dead birds, dolphins, fish, turtles, etc. If these creatures die from contact with the dispersants, they drop to the bottom of the Gulf. If they die from contact with the oil, they wash up on the shores, and there will be photos of them in the media. I also learned that BP has an incentive to keep the volcano belching because they're profiting an extra $10 million daily from higher prices at the pump. But I am encouraged that there are some tremendously qualified people working hard and potentially effectively on this. I've heard lately from Stephanie Sutton. She says, to understand the problem, we have to put our heads together and think outside the box. This may be calling us all to come forward now, all of us standing in the wings and gasping and wondering and wanting to do something about this. And so she has provided information about the size of the, what could actually be seen as an oil volcano. It's coming from a hole 5 feet in diameter at a rate of approximately 4 barrels per second. The oil coming up through 5,000 feet of pressurized salt water acts like a fractioning column. What you see on the surface is just around 20% of what is actually underneath the approximately 9,000 square miles of slick on the surface. The natural gas doesn't bubble to the top, but gets suspended in the water, depleting the oxygen from the water. BP would not have been celebrating with execs on the rig just prior to the explosion if it had not been capable of producing at least 500,000 barrels per day under control. If the rock gave way due to the out-of-control gushing, or due to a nuke being detonated to contain the leak, it could become a Yellowstone caldera-type event, except from below a mile of sea, with a quarter-mile opening, with up to 150,000 psi of oil and natural gas behind it, from a reserve nearly as large as the Gulf of Mexico, containing trillions of barrels of oil. That would be an Earth extinction event. We also have some really heavy news from the Orion Project, which is a group dedicated to providing some of the best applications of free energy. They had been working with a scientist who had assured them that even though he had an indirect link to the intelligence community, he had been cleared to work with them on these new devices. and the Orion people said that they spent some time with him and agreed upon a system he described that would be akin to a Tesla-type high-voltage system that would extract energy out of the Earth's energy field. It could run 24 hours a day, independent of solar energy or wind, and be more cost-effective as well as non-polluting. Given his credentials and independent high-level confirmation from scientists who had reproduced his work, we were excited to move forward with this particular scientist. In mid-March, though, there was a sudden change. He called to say he was receiving threats from, quote, foreign nationals that had to do with his other job obligations. He said that phone calls with the Orion Project board had been recorded and played back to him. He said there was no problem with us. In fact, several times over the past couple of months, he reiterated that his handlers in the intelligence community had checked us out and okayed our working together. We had multiple conversations with him. He said several people who worked in security visited him and they gave him disturbing information. One of them he identified was a past director of the Central Intelligence Agency. Apparently he was getting disinformation because he had previously mentioned multiple times that he'd been thoroughly checked out by the intelligence community. Just after this occurred, 3 more scientists who had agreed to work with us with impeccable credentials and experience in the aerospace industry, a major government laboratory and military projects, were all provided with disinformation or threatened in some way to keep them from working with us. This is an astonishing example of how a group who wishes to retain power, this group called Majestic, keeps its grip on the world, maintaining the fossil fuel economy with its multi-trillion-dollar derivatives value. Coal mine shafts collapse worldwide and kill many. Vast amounts of oil continue to spew into the Gulf of Mexico, while many in the world continue without basic energy resources. We must have been on the right track for these beasts to circle their wagons with illegal wiretapping of our conversations, interference with a legal contract, and bringing in a powerful former CIA director to intimidate and kill this initiative. Further, since we started the Orion project, Dr. Greer has received multiple death threats and repeatedly been stalked. So what can we do in the face of these highly orchestrated suppression efforts? We have in the last couple of weeks created a very extensive file, including both audio and paper documents, that contains information relating to these events. In the event that anything happens to any of us, injury, false legal charges, disappearance, death, and we cannot go forward, copies of this information will be released to the public. The file includes every bit of information about the scientists who can do this work and are not allowed to, as well as very reliable evidence and information about those involved in the suppression, names, addresses, phone numbers, specific details of actions. Thank you very much for your time. I hope that this information does reach a lot of young people in the U.S. because in my experience over the last few decades, it's up to the younger generation. They must come forward as they did in the 60s and inspire us old people.